The X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. We're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell, and this is the X Zone Radio Show. You can always find us online at xzoneradiotv.com. That's all our social media sites. My email address is xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, and our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. My guest this hour is Mark McCANDLISH. He is an internationally recognized artist who has specialized in aviation and conceptual art with the defense and aerospace industries for a better part of the last 30 years, serving the needs of many of the top American corporations in this regard. Mark's father was a 25-year veteran of the United States Air Force, and as a consequence, Mark had a lifelong love of aircraft and aviation history. His first UFO sighting occurred at Westover Air Force Base in the state of Massachusetts in the winter of 1966, and he observed the craft through an 80-power telescope for about 10 minutes before it accelerated out of sight at extreme velocity. He later discovered that this craft had been hovering above a flight of nuclear-armed Boeing B-52s sitting on the alert ramp of the first flight line of base. Mark has spent most of his life trying to discover the science that would make such incredible performance possible, and he believes that there is a plausible, there you go, Robbie, it's plausible answer to interstellar flight without violating the currently accepted laws of physics. Having had literally dozens of sightings since 1966, he feels certain that this carefully protected technology has been co-opted by as a yet unknown group, and that the sequestration of this technology has provided the organization tremendous leverage in world politics, finance, and international conflicts over the past 5 decades. His website is markmccandlish.com. Mark, welcome back to the X Zone. It has been some time.
Yes, it has, Rob, and I appreciate the invitation. It's nice to be speaking with you again.
Great talking to you. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about zero-point energy, and I was wondering if you could give our listeners basic description of what that is.
Okay, well, zero-point energy pretty much got its name from the way in which it was discovered. Everything around us has a certain level of energy and heat that in the physics world is referred to as Brownian motion. Mm-hmm. It basically causes all the molecules and the atoms to be vibrating and bouncing around against one another. And so there's always this energy present in the environment. So when they first began to experiment with cryogenic fluids, things that were super cold, like liquid oxygen, liquid nitrogen, where you take the gases and you keep compressing them down and down and down until the gases actually turn into a liquid and become super, super cold, many, many degrees, hundreds of degrees below zero. That is 0 Fahrenheit. Eventually, they were hoping to discover what would happen if they could cool everything in a small area down to absolute zero. So that's where the term zero-point energy comes from, is that was the goal. But when they began getting down to this point where they were very close to an absolute zero reading, and they never really could get quite there, they found that there was this kind of electrical charge or flux that remained in this containment vessel that they were looking at. And so I think it was Max Planck who coined the phrase Zitterbewegung, or jiggle, that was associated with this phenomenon. was a kind of an energy that seemed to be pervasive. And when they started looking at the mathematics, it was originally thought that the figures that they were coming up with were an artifact of just a lack of understanding of what was really going on in physics, because they were finding figures that were something on the order of 10 to the 26th power joules per cubic meter. So imagine the amount of energy that it would take to boil off the oceans of the entire planet, and you could find that energy density in just a box that is roughly a cubic meter in size. That's how much energy is embedded in that amount of space-time. Of course, you're talking about energies that are operating at many different frequencies and many different power levels. Some apparently undetectable without the proper instruments. That's why it was little known for many years, but this was at the end of the 1800s, and in the early 1900s when Albert Einstein was looking at general relativity and the investigations of what happens with planetary motions and the things going on with atoms and so forth, he predicted that it would never be possible to travel faster than the speed of light, because as you accelerate through space-time, the structure of your vehicle and everything in it, including the pilot, it has an increasing interaction with this energy that's embedded in space-time, the same energy they discovered in these cryogenic experiments called zero-point energy, or quantum zero-point fluctuations of the vacuum is the term they use in the physics community. So as time went on, they began to realize that as you accelerate through space-time, you see actually an increase in your mass. And you can, in a general sense, you can kind of think of mass as being like the weight of the vehicle increases, because this increasing interaction with this energy in the space-time around you, it begins to energize and it creates an effect where the atoms become so full of energy that is absorbed from this energy that's in the environment, that you see a phenomenon where the mass begins to increase. This is kind of where Einstein's equation came from, where he talked about E equals mc squared,
right,
or a certain amount of energy is equal to mass times the speed of light squared. It's showing an equivalency between a certain amount of energy and a certain amount of mass. And so the idea was that as you accelerate through space-time, you have a greater and greater interaction as you go faster and faster with this energy, and it manifests as an increase in mass. And so eventually you get to a point where as you're approaching the speed of light, your mass grows exponentially almost to infinity, which makes it literally impossible to get beyond the speed of light. So the technology that was incorporated into these vehicles basically turned all of that thinking on its head. Namely, what they found was that if you can tap into that energy and use that as your source of power, rather than carrying a bunch of rocket fuel on your aircraft, you tap into this energy, you find a way of rectifying it and turning it into another form of energy, electricity. You use that to power your propulsion system. And so the faster you go, the more energy is available. So what happens is the mass of the vehicle literally winds up becoming modified compared with what it would be in otherwise, in other circumstances. Gotcha. Where you're just using a rocket engine or something. And so the faster you go, the more energy you have available, which makes it possible to go faster still.
Mark, we've got to take a break. Please stand by. Okay. Sorry about that, buddy. Exonation, a good friend of the Exxon. Mark McCandlish is our guest this hour. His website is www.markmccandlish.com. This is the Exxon. I am Rob McConnell. I hope everyone enjoys their weekend. This is summertime. Enjoy yourself. Make sure you wear plenty of sunscreen because it's a scorcher out there. The UV index is high. And please remember, if you drink responsibly. And if you drink, don't drive. I'm Rob McConnell. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.
Gibbs A. Williams, Ph.D., is a practicing psychoanalyst, supervisor, researcher, and author in New York City. Much of his life has been dedicated to understanding nature and the uses of meaningful coincidences or synchronicities. His radical and original non-Jungian, non-mystical, non-magical theory of synchronicities illuminates much of the fog surrounding this challenging and perplexing topic. His ideas and manners are fresh, presented in a style that is both entertaining and highly informative. He is also an expert on crisis intervention, specially focused on violence reduction for the police and citizens, mastering anxiety, frustration, and stress without the use of medication, and effectively preventing and treating heroin addiction. Dr. Williams can be contacted at his email address at gwwilliamsny11@aol.com or visit his website at www.drgibbswilliams.com. If you enjoy reading a good mystery with a touch of the paranormal, then you'll love From Out of the Woodwork by William S. Peckham. Sean Kennedy, a Toronto contractor, buys derelict houses, guts them, and turns them into multi-family dwellings. When Sean buys 29 Livery Lane, a century house in ruins, and starts the renovation, the house fights back. He is visited by ghosts of owners past. His visions are triggered by touching an oak mantle, reading a faded letter, opening an old locket, or opening a brand new casket in the basement. These visions will take you on a trip across southern Ontario from Niagara Falls to Toronto to Kingston. From Out of the Woodwork is now available in paperback and on your favorite electronic reader. To order your copy of From Out of the Woodwork, go to www.williamspeckham.com. That's www.williamspeckham.com.
Mark McCandlish is our special guest this hour. Explanation, www.markmccandlish.com is the website. So, Mark, this 0-point energy, is it anything like the energy that people talk about that was discovered by scientists in 2014?
You're talking about dark energy?
Well, this is the blurb that comes to mind. In 2014, scientists discovered a way to harness the sun energy into a vacuum box. Their theory is to learn how to apply this energy to a spacecraft. They would be able to achieve speeds of 660 million miles per hour.
Well, I haven't seen that article.
No.
It probably has a little bit more detail that I would probably need to see before I could give you a straight answer on that. But I imagine that if they're talking about something connected to the sun, that they're looking at capturing some form of energy that comes from the sun. Maybe it's something that you would find in the solar wind. Maybe it's something that you would find in coronal mass ejections, because I know there's a tremendous amount of extremely powerful ions that are emitted by the sun all the time. This is one of the reasons why we don't get fried, is because we have the electromagnetic field of the or magnetic field of the Earth, I should say, and it creates kind of a barrier that diverts all of this energy around us. It's only when you have an extremely powerful CME, coronal mass ejection, that strikes the Earth or comes close to it, that you begin to see the possibility of some things being harmed by that, including things like electromagnetic pulses and such. But other than that, I would have to see the article to know for sure.
The 0-point energy, is it being utilized or planned to be utilized in any of the transportation modes that we have right now?
Well, apparently it has been for quite some time, at the very least, dating back to the 1960s. The inference from just the name of the earliest prototype craft that they were using, the alien reproduction vehicle, suggests that their first clues probably came from crash recoveries of one kind or another, which date all the way back to the 1930s, from what I've seen. And it looks as though there were actually crashes that occurred before the legendary crash that occurred at Roswell. There were others that happened in the same general area of the United States. There were crashes at Paradise, Arizona. There was Aztec, New Mexico. There was one near Flagstaff, Arizona as well, sort of in the Four Corners region of the Southwest, and there was a lot of speculation that perhaps this had something to do with the early experiments of using radar or the development of radar, the earliest versions of which broadcast extremely powerful signals over a broad spectrum of frequencies, which may have had something to do with jamming the guidance control systems of these craft.
But there were other test areas that were used by the military, weren't there, at the same time?
They had testing that was going on in southern New Mexico near White Sands. They had testing that was going on out near or north of Las Vegas in the early above ground testing of nuclear weapons. I think the very first nuclear blast that we had occurred near White Sands. I think it was actually fired from an artillery piece, if I remember correctly. But at least one of them was anyway. But so there's always been this interest in experimenting with the power of the atom, both in fissible experiments and fusion experiments. And there are a variety of radioisotopes that could actually function as a weapons-grade type of material. Even thorium itself is a type of material that could be used in nuclear weapons, and was the primary focus of the German army in the hopeful development of their nuclear weapon near the end of the Second World War. But we apparently outpaced their experiments and found some success, and actually bombed the snot out of all of their research labs, so they didn't get very far, at least far enough to develop something that worked.
Was zero-point energy any part of the Aurora project?
No, it really wasn't. The Aurora project, in its original iteration, the very first concept, was an aircraft. It turned out to be a very large, remotely piloted vehicle. It was shaped something like a flattened-out football shape, rounded on all the edges, completely covered with heat ablative tiles, like the space shuttle. It didn't have a cockpit. It had two infrared cameras that were offset about 6 feet apart up at the very front end of it. And it was piloted by individuals who were working out of a special facility at Indian Springs Air Force Base northwest of Las Vegas. It was about 105 feet long, about 70 to 75 feet wide, possibly wider. I would say approaching something around 8 to 10 feet thick at the middle section. There was a slight ridge that ran across the widest part of the lifting air body, or aeroform of the body. Did not have any wings or tails or anything like that. Had control surfaces along the leading edge and along the trailing edge. It had four high bypass turbojet engines on the inside of this shape that were fed both from below and from above by a set of triangular-shaped NACA ducts that actually would shut completely and smooth over the surface when another type of propulsion system took over. The four engines that were inside also had some sort of trapezoidal-shaped exhaust ports along the afterbody of this vehicle, and they would also shut off to make the surface smooth. And what this aircraft would do is it would get up to speed, something in excess of Mach 2, using the four engines internally, and then it would begin spraying fuel out of hundreds of little fuel injectors that basically were pointing outward along the trailing edge of this ridge that ran laterally across the width of the body. And by that time, the air flowing across this vehicle at Mach 2 plus was heating up the surface and compressing the air to such a degree that the instant the fuel hit the airstream, it would explode, and it would expand between the supersonic shock wave that separated right at that little ridge, and it would basically pinch the tail end of the vehicle. I described the process as being very similar to taking a pumpkin seed a wet pumpkin seed in your fingers and squeezing it. And someone picked up that phrase and alleged that this thing was called the pumpkin seed, the flying, flaming pumpkin seed, or some ridiculous phrase. And I never said that. The clients and the witnesses never said that, but somebody seemed to think that that's what was used to describe, but it was never called that. It was called the Aurora Pulsar, because what they found over time was that the tiles on the afterbody of this vehicle could not take the heat of the sustained release of this fuel into the airstream, which would ignite. It would literally start to melt the tiles. It would become so hot. And so they had to actually operate this thing so that the engines or this external burning mechanism, which is very similar to what you find in what is called a linear aerospike engine, it would be ignited for about 5 seconds, and then it would cool for 10 to 15 seconds. And so you could see this moving across the sky, particularly around 1994 to 1998 or so. You could actually see this flying over Northern California at night.
Mark, I've got to take my news break. Please stand by.
Okay.
Exonation. Mark McCandlish is our special guest. www.markmccandlish.com. We'll both be back discussing more right here in the X Zone from our broadcast center of Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.
You're listening to the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Why is Egypt in tumult? Mahmoud Ahmadinejad became president of Iran in August 2005. Few know that he was the ringleader in the 1978 U.S. Embassy siege. The Tehran siege released the virus of Shia fundamentalism. It lasted 444 days. But that number, 444, has been seen before because the pact between Hitler and Mussolini lasted precisely 444 weeks. So could events on Earth be driven by some invisible power working with numbers? In the book, The Genesis Grid, it is proved incontrovertibly that a set of 6 simple numbers is found in 11 places across the Bible. An ancient prophecy of 2 colliding kingdoms, one in Europe and one in the Middle East, is unfolding now. Powers alien to this planet have written the future already. Find out more in The Genesis Grid.
This is news from the X Zone. I'm Amanda Curran. Scientists in Japan have begun work on a prototype design that could form the basis of a future space elevator. A mini satellite called STARS-C will be delivered to the ISS, and once there, the orbiter will split into 2 10-centimeter cubes and spool out a thin 100-meter tether made of Kevlar between them. The engineers behind this revolutionary technology explain the satellites move not just vertically, but horizontally as well when we expand their tethers. As data must be collected in detail to control the satellite in space with precision, we hope to do it properly this time. Though earlier such experiments had failed, they say at very least it will help scientists explore the way to clear space debris from around the edge of the atmosphere. Through a very successful Kickstarter campaign, Philip Lubin, an esteemed professor from the University of California, Santa Barbara, is now underway in developing a small, sail-equipped wavercraft propelled by laser beams to Alpha Centauri and other destinations to send a time capsule from the world to space. This ground-based laser system would beam the digitally encoded data into space, and as Lubin says, we sometimes use the phrase, we want to back up humanity, which is not a joke. We want to do this. Personally, I would like to send out a blueprint for life on Earth and how to construct us, how to make us. Donations are $10 or more for the opportunity for immortality. 2 independent astronomers have come to the same conclusion, that the mysterious Planet 9 knocked the other planets in the solar system 6 degrees off kilter in relation to the axis of the Sun. Early theories had suggested that the Sun's axis should be perpendicular to the original plane that the 8 planets orbit, and researchers at the time blamed the tilt on the gravitational influence by a passing rogue star. Both models are based on the idea that the shift happened early in the life of the solar system. With a drastically different orbital plane relative to the rest of the planets, the model shows that Planet 9 could have pulled Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune out of line as a group, with the little planets tagging along. I'm Amanda Curran, News from the X Zone.
Thomas Jefferson was a Burgess of 27 when he met Martha Wales Skelton, a 22-year-old widowed heiress who was fondly called Patty by her family. They were married on January the 1st, 1772, and they took up residence in a cabin on the building site on top of a Virginia mountain that Thomas had named Monticello. As Thomas and Patty slowly built their first version of the great house at Monticello, the Revolutionary War was heating up. Patty, with difficulty, bore 5 children, but only 2 girls survived. Thomas's political career developed to the point where he was often away from home. But after he authored and signed the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia, he resolved never again to leave his wife. He was elected the governor of Virginia, just as that state became the Revolution's last battleground. The Revolutionary War ended in 1781, and Thomas gladly retired altogether to my family, my farm, and my books. But Patty continued to want to bear her treasured husband a son, and late in the summer of 1782, she died of kidney failure at the age of 33, 4 months after having borne yet another girl. Thomas was so devastated by her death that he never remarried. He mourned her for the rest of his life, even as he helped to frame the peace in France and then became the first Secretary of State, the second Vice President, and the third President of the United States. This story is true. Thomas Jefferson was such an obsessive letter writer and record keeper that we know where he was and what he was doing nearly every day of his adult life. Every significant thing he says in My Thomas comes from his contemporary writings. My Thomas by Roberta Grimes is now available at Barnes & Noble, Costco, Target, Books A Million, Hudson Booksellers, Kmart, Walmart, Sam's Club, Walgreens, CVS, and online at Amazon.com. You can visit Roberta Grimes online at www.robertagrimes.com.
You're listening to the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Welcome back, one and all. Mark McCandlish is my special guest this hour, www.markmccandlish.com. Mark, was the Aurora supposed to take the place of the SR-71?
Well, I suppose it could have been used in that role, except that the Aurora was originally intended as a first-strike weapon system. It had vertical launch tubes in its belly. It could carry up to 121 tactical nuclear reentry vehicles. They were all set up in a very simple way. It was a circular tile on the exterior of the craft, held in place by explosive bolts, and there was a sort of a cone-shaped reentry vehicle above that with a 3-piece sabot that held it in the tube. And then behind that was another tile and a big coiled spring. It was that simple. And once they would blow off, put in the targeting telemetry into the warhead,
right,
they would blow away the tile. It would kick the weapon system out of the tube. It would immediately stabilize in the airstream because of its center of gravity being what it was. New tile would slam down in place, and in just a fraction of a second, the exterior of the craft would be smooth again. So you wouldn't have to worry about the weapons bay doors being torn off or something. At Mach 12, I think it was, or Mach 17, I guess, 12,000 miles an hour. Depends on your altitude, of course, but that's what it was set up for. Originally, there were supposedly 12 of these things built. I had heard later from an industry source that there were up to 24 of them built. There was a fellow who used to work for Aviation Week, friend of mine, Bill Scott, who is an editor for the magazine, worked with Bill Burns on, I think it was UFO Hunters as a consultant. And he had a source at the Pentagon that said that this weapon system, although it worked, was not extremely reliable. They had a lot of problems with it, and I think that was probably about the time that Lockheed called me up and asked me to produce some artwork for a second-generation aircraft in an existing family of aircraft. They wanted me to draw something that looked very, very fast, and I combined features off of the SR-71 Blackbird and the XB-70, which was capable of something close to Mach 3. And when I presented the drawing to these engineers from Skunk Works, it was almost as though a state of panic had set in, as though a leak had occurred somewhere in the pecking order there, because they became very upset. And I didn't really know why until a few years later, when there was a near miss between an aircraft that looked very much like what I had drawn and an airliner that was coming out of LAX and sort of curling back up on its way to Salt Lake City, passing over the Edwards Air Force Base complex. So guess I touched a nerve, and that was kind of when I began to realize that there was this entirely different, higher level of sophistication in what was going on in terms of aircraft that were being flown, the level of technology that was being used. It was all being kept very hush-hush, very classified, and it was only 2 years later that I was informed by some colleagues of mine about the so-called alien reproduction vehicle that Lockheed had developed in the 60s that was using zero-point energy as a power source to produce a kind of field propulsion system, or anti-gravity propulsion, if you will.
Is there a secret space program?
There is. And the funny thing is that I live here in Northern California in the community of Redding, California, and just about any night of the week, if you go outside between about 11 p.m. and 4 in the morning, you can see these things coming down into the vicinity of two regions west of town, out in the coastal mountain range. One of these bases is somewhere near the Trinity Alps, which is near the community of Weaverville. Mm-hmm. There also happens to be a very large Indian reservation out there. So if this is something being operated by the CIA, of course they can operate out of a sovereign nation, but they can't operate out of the continental United States. It's part of their
charter
mission statement, mm-hmm. apparently. And there is another facility that's supposedly under Tom's Head Mountain, which is about 37 miles southwest of Redding and west of the community of Red Bluff. There's been a lot of these unusual type of crafts that have been seen converging on that mountain as well. Now, I've seen these things, and initially they kind of look like strange meteors that have kind of a different look to them. Mm-hmm. The funny thing about it is that they don't speed up as they're falling like a normal meteor. They actually slow down, and then sometimes they exhibit what has been termed kind of a falling leaf pattern as they come down. I've seen very large discs. I've seen very large cylinders, kind of like a cigar shape, moving at tremendous velocities. And I've seen a number of smaller discs that had kind of an octagonal port in the bottom, which had kind of a number of glowing, almost like a honeycomb pattern of panels inside, shooting off little red orbs and things. There was a young couple that bought some land right near the base of Tom's Head Mountain back in the 1980s that were out camping on some land that they had just bought late at night, and they saw something up near their pickup truck, which they couldn't quite drive down into the canyon where their property was. So they took an ATV, they went up to the truck, and here was a flying saucer hovering above their craft, followed them down and hovered above their campfire for the better part of an hour or so. And they had a lot of telepathic communication, the stereotypical thing about, we're concerned about your planet, et cetera, et cetera. But the family was very skeptical, so the next evening, the young man... the young bridegroom, his brother said, well, I want to go up there and see this stuff. So they went up in his truck, and no sooner had they arrived, this is just after sundown, they looked down into the canyon on the opposite side of the ridge from where their property was, and here was this 300-foot diameter black disc. Looked like a lens-shaped disc with a slight dome on the top, had these green, almost like fluorescent light tubes in segments around the edge. And this thing was just above the treetops. He got a Polaroid photograph of it, which was really surprising. I had a chance to see the Polaroid, or the original Polaroid, but it was emitting these small red balls of light, the little orbs and things, and they were floating out among the shrubs and the trees and things, and they would stop and make kind of a laser scan of the bushes and the rocks. It was sort of doing a biological survey of the local flora and fauna, and they captured this in a Polaroid photograph. So, the coincidence here is that I've talked to witnesses who've seen craft that look exactly like that coming out of Lockheed Skunk Works as recently as 1992. And that these craft would be met just outside the eastern face of the Skunk Works building, big hangar that was used originally to produce the L-1011 airliner back in the 60s. And the craft would hover above this group of vehicles that were kind of, they use them to work on power lines. It looks like a turret that's on the ground that's really heavy.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And it has an extendable arm that comes with a basket that the driver can control from up there. And they had a tarp that extended from one of these vehicles to the next, probably 12 to 15 of these things maybe, in a circle, with this tarp forming kind of an arena, and the craft came down into the middle of that, and then all of the arms extended out over the center of this thing, and then the whole group trundled into the hangar doors closed, and the witness said that he saw the procedure sort of reverse itself a week later, about the same time of night, quarter of midnight, and which is a funny thing too, because the number 11 comes up all the time. 11:44 p.m., 2:22 in the morning, 3:22, 4:44 a.m. I mean, it's weird, but
it is.
Many of the observations that I've seen always happen at a number that involves some multiple or something involving the number 11.
I'm just going to interject here, because a number of our listeners have said that they notice 11:11 on their clocks, on their clock radios, on their watches, on their microwaves.
I know.
It's very strange.
Who knows? Who understands? I mean, but all of this is there's something going on there. I don't really pretend to know what it is, but it's one of the things that I try to do when I'm looking at this kind of stuff. I look for patterns. I always look for patterns, because if you can see a pattern, then you can predict when something will happen in the future. And if you can do that, then you can record it on video. And that's really what you want to be able to do. About 2-3 years ago, I noticed that one of these vehicles was coming down from the north on about a 60-degree declination into the Trinity Mountain complex, Trinity Alps complex. I could see this right from my backyard. It was at 2:22 a.m. So a week later, I went out, sat right there, and saw the exact same thing happen again. And the third week out, it happened a third time, and I got so excited, because now I knew that what I was seeing definitely was not something in the way of a natural phenomenon. This was something artificial. This was some kind of a craft coming down out of the sky. And the minute I mentioned it on my phone, the phenomenon stopped. It never happened again at that time of the morning, ever.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So that made it pretty clear to me that somebody's probably monitoring my activities. But the one thing that we see very often here, and you can look this up on Google if you do a search of Google using flashers in the night sky or flashes of light in the night sky, you can see not only still photographs, but you can see videos of what happens very often around here. And what we believe locally is that what we're seeing is the tail end of a wormhole event, a traversable wormhole being used by these craft coming into this region from someplace else. And very often what you see is vehicles that are departing from another star system, and the light of the star that they're coming from is literally projected right through the wormhole. So when this portal opens, you see the starlight of that distant star. We call them flashers. It's instant on, instant off. I've seen them as large as a 50-cent piece held at arm's length. And if you're lucky enough to be observing the very spot in the sky where these things happen, very often you can see an object materialize right in the same spot where the center of that event occurs, and then it zips away very quickly. So it's obviously some kind of a vehicle coming to this region from somewhere else using some kind of advanced technology. But I've also seen things that suggest that there's some kind of a time modification or time dilation effect that's occurring too. There was an evening right after the events of 9/11 where I was outside watering some plants, heard this crackling sound that was very similar to the sound of tires rolling over gravel very fast. Whipped around to see, what I thought would be a car coming up my driveway very quickly, and I saw this cigar-shaped object, very brightly illuminated, self-luminous, white, kind of a blue halo around it, crossing the sky from east to west and descending, sort of in a shallow descent into the Trinity Mountain complex, Trinity Alps complex. And it had this very long ionization trail behind it, and then, right as it got about 15 degrees above the horizon going to the west, the object and its entire ionization trail vanished at the same instant. It was almost like somebody took a film clip of this and then cut it, moved it forward 10 seconds, so that not only the appearance of the craft but the ionization trail would have had time to disappear, and then started the film again. It was just an instantaneous disappearance. I've never seen anything like it. And I've talked to other people who've witnessed this same phenomenon as well. But I started thinking about how these things are able to go through the atmosphere at such tremendous velocities and not produce a supersonic shock wave, and it seemed to me that time had to be modified in a way as well. So I ran this question that I had in my mind past my friend Hal Putoff, who's down in Austin, Texas, and I said, this is what I've been observing. This is something that Dr. Fred Bell observed in a device that he built in Laguna Beach and operated somewhere around 1997 or so, that seemed to show a time dilation effect where he was actually experiencing an accelerated pace of time inside the device he built. But the objects, anything moving on the outside, like the traffic that was passing behind his home on Laguna on the Pacific Coast Highway, cars going by 65 miles an hour suddenly slam to a stop, and they're crawling along literally at a snail's pace, and you can see the headlights flashing on and flashing off again, and in a cycle that took about 30 seconds. So it wound up suggesting that he was living in a timeline that was moving at about 500 times the pace of local space-time. So if you take that and you interpret that into an object that's moving through the sky, to the person that's inside that vehicle, it seems like he's cruising through the sky with no problem at all. But everything around him on the outside is seeing this event as though he's moving very quickly. But if you consider the air that the air that the vehicle's passing through, it's influenced by this change in the pace of time, so that as it enters the event horizon of this disturbed region of space-time, the air is sped up in its flow of time as well, and so it experiences no real severe shock or energy transfer like you'd expect from a plane flying at supersonic speeds. And so the air is very slowly displaced as it moves through this disturbed region of space-time where you have this metric engineering going on. And then after it exits the event horizon, it reacquires its interaction with zero-point energy, and it actually causes the electrons in the outer orbits of the atoms in the molecules of air to bounce to a higher orbit and then stabilize down to where their steady state would be, and they emit that excess energy as photons. And that's why you see a glowing trail behind UFOs when they're zipping across the sky, because there's that sudden change in the rate at which these molecules are interacting with the static zero-point energy in the environment. So, but if you can play with that, it means that you can modify the pace of time as well as the effect of mass. And this is exactly what Hal said. He'd written a paper. It was published in 2010 in JBIS, which is one of the big physics journals, I guess. Not really sure what JBIS stands for, but I think it was volume 62 or 63, pages 82 to 89, something like that. But
Mark,
he said, yes.
I've got to take another break. It's
okay.
Our final break for this hour. Exonation, Mark McCandlish is our very special guest. He's got a great website, Exonation, www.markmccandlish.com. When we come back, Mark, I'd like to talk to you for a couple of minutes about James Allen and what and the film that you guys have, and how our listeners can watch it. So that's coming up in the next segment here on the X Zone.
Thank you.
My pleasure, sir. X Zone Nation, I'll be back on the other side of this break as we wrap up this night and this week here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell. Don't go away.
He is a practicing psychoanalyst, supervisor, researcher, and author in New York City. Much of his life has been dedicated to understanding nature and the uses of meaningful coincidences or synchronicities. His radical and original non-Jungian, non-mystical, non-magical theory of synchronicities illuminates much of the fog surrounding this challenging and perplexing topic. His ideas and manners are fresh, presented in a style that is both entertaining and highly informative. He is also an expert on crisis intervention, specially focused on violence reduction for the police and citizens, mastering anxiety, frustration, and stress without the use of medication, and effectively preventing and treating heroin addiction. Dr. Williams can be contacted at his email address at gwwilliamsny11@aol.com or visit his website at www.drgibbswilliams.com. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
You're listening to the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone radio show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Exonation, Mark McCandlish is my special guest of this hour. www.markmccandlish.com. Mark, I understand that you have some ARV blueprints that you'd like to promote that you're selling.
Sure.
Okay, tell us about it.
People can contact me at my email address. It's markmccandlish@gmail.com. I sell the prints for $20 plus shipping and handling, come in a nice sturdy tube. And up in Canada, of course, I guess there's a customs fee, so it can get a little bit more expensive than that. But within the continental United States, it's fairly inexpensive.
But it's worth it. It's worth the extra bucks, guys. Come on. Canadians,
well, thank you.
Canadians aren't cheap. We know a good deal when we see it.
I love Canadians.
Well, we love you too, Mark.
But it helps to support my research, and And as it happens, you want to discuss James Allen and his film. After he passed away, I believe he was murdered. He bequeathed his camera that the documentary was shot on, and I have that today. It's sitting here right in my studio. It's a beautiful Canon EOS 5D Mark II.
Wow, they are nice cameras.
High resolution video or digital video, or digital stills, I guess you would say. And beautiful camera. I'm proud to own it. And he did this video. It's entitled Zero Point: The Story of Mark McCandlish and the Flux Liner, and you can see it on Vimeo or YouTube as a free download. And it kind of outlines not only what happened to him, but the 25 years or so that I spent researching the propulsion technology on the ARV. After he had turned this in as a student film for his thesis for his Master's of Film Production at the Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, Georgia, he decided to take this to commercial release, and he was going to add some additional footage from the interviews that he had conducted when he flew out here. And about 2 months from completion, he became extremely ill. He was diagnosed as a highly aggressive bile duct cancer, which turns out is often associated with the ingestion of radioactive thorium.
Really?
Of all things. So we told the coroner that we wanted a pathology done on his blood and tissue post-mortem after he passed. He died 2 months later. It took his life very quickly. It was terrible. And but the coroners dragged their feet for a long time. We had to threaten them with a lawsuit, but they finally gave us the specimens were sent to a pathology lab in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and this report, Rob, you wouldn't believe it. It came back with thorium, uranium, cadmium, beryllium, aluminum, mercury, lead, everything you can imagine in the way of heavy metals and radioisotopes. And there was no doubt when we saw the analysis that this is what killed him. And we've made 3 attempts to get the FBI office in Atlanta, Georgia. They closed after his death. They closed down the office in Savannah, where we initially tried to get an investigation launched.
Right.
We contacted the Public Board of Health, which expressed initially, because obviously if he's been exposed to radioisotopes, maybe his apartment's contaminated. His cat died a rather violent, sudden became. Hey,
Mark, I hate to do this, buddy. We're going to have to get you back on because we still have so much to talk about. Mark, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And Exo Nation, if you'd like to find out more about Mark, if you'd like to get yourself a copy of the blueprints for the ARV, www.markmccandlish.com. Well, that's it for this week, Exo Nation. I'll be back Monday night at 11 o'clock as once again we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X-Zone. So from everyone here, Laura Rogers, my senior producer and beautiful wife, Craig West, our studio producer, and of course the lovely and talented Amanda Curran in Sydney, Nova Scotia, who takes care of our X-Zone news. Have a safe weekend, everyone. And always remember, make someone happy and keep your eyes to the sky and your heart to the light. Good night now.